You'd be forgiven for finding the current automotive landscape in the UK just a touch bleak. Everything seems to be replaced these days with 2-litre 4-pot turbocharged 2-ton dual clutch monsters. And yet Lotus have come out with this, the Emira, a manual 1400 kilo 6-cylinder supercharged sports car. This is Eventuri's development car. They've been kind enough to lend it to us here at Shooting Brake. They've been using this car to develop their amazing sounding intake, and we're going to test it out today. The question is though, when a car looks this good, do you even need to road test it? I mean, this is the Cayman rival. You park a Cayman next to this and it's going to look like a Fiat 500. It's absolutely unreal. All this really needs to do is just not blow up, and it's already going to be a shoe-in my opinion. I mean, just unbelievable. It's got hints of LaFerrari, hints of Enzo, hints of McLaren. It looks like something that would roll through the gates of Maranello, and yet you can buy this for £75,000 and it's made up the road in Norfolk. How nuts is that? So we're going to road test this, but we have to talk about the design first. Let's just talk about the proportions. This nose, the Lotus badge, is lower than my knee. These headlights are way below my hip height. So when this is driving along in your rear view mirror, it's absolutely unbelievable the presence that this has in person, and that can't really be fully described or shown on video. You have to see this in person to really understand the proportions. On top of that, some of the detailing is incredible. You've got this vent which is functional, and what happens is there's a V-mounted radiator, and the air gets sucked through the radiator out of these vents, up the windscreen and over these haunches. I really like the design. The headlights are nice and simple. A lot of manufacturers these days are overcomplicating headlights. I think these are absolutely gorgeous, and on top of that, look at these wheels. I'm a big wheel guy. Most cars that come out of the factory, in my opinion, would be improved by a set of BBS FIRs. Lotus decided to just give the car a wheel that looks just like that, which is brilliant. This one's sitting on MSS springs from Evolve, so it sits really nicely. They do sit a bit high as standard. I understand that Lotus do that to give it a bit more suspension travel, which is the Lotus thing, but when it looks this good, I think I'd happily take the compromise personally, and it does drive really nicely on these springs. I can't complain at all. Moving down the side of the car, you've got this deeply scalloped window line, and you've got this scoop that comes in through here. I believe this is the intake, and the other one feeds some cooling bits. This to me is pure McLaren. And when you're driving along in your wing mirrors, you can see these cheeks and these haunches poking out. It's so, so special without being obstructive. Now let's move on to the back, which is another highlight. So first off, look at the amount of horizontal real estate we've got on this car. That's the mark of something truly special. You don't get that on sports cars usually. You normally only get that on supercars. You've got really broad haunches. You could rest a coffee cup here. You could have actually a whole lunch on this little flank here. And the way this feeds and integrates ductile with the rear window and these little scalloped sort of haunches here remind me of a Ferrari F12, which is no bad thing. On top of that, peek through the window and you see a Lotus emblazoned cam cover and actuator for the supercharger, which you can actually see moving in your rearview mirror when you're driving. We'll show you that later. It really, really reminds me of the forgot my signal. Evija. And then we have to talk about the interior. Now, this is a Lotus. The last GT that Lotus made, the Evora, didn't even have armrests in the door cards. This interior is absolutely gorgeous. It's gone from being something you tolerate to a genuine highlight in the car. I mean, ignoring the fact this has the absolute gorgeous combination of green over tan, the fact is the actual design of the interior is brilliant. So there's a few details I want to highlight. First off, this is an aluminium chassis car, so aluminium chassis cars tend to have really big extrusions to make them stiff because aluminium is inherently weaker metal than steel. So normally Lotuses had massive sills you had to step over, but this car is so easy to get into. How brilliant is that? So you could genuinely daily this. It's such an easy car to get in and out of. The seats are so, so comfy. They've got this gorgeous smelling leather that's so soft. Every single surface you touch is leather. All the switchgear is gorgeous, feels really nice in your hand. You've got actual HVAC controls, which are physical, so you don't need to use a touchscreen. In fact, you actually really never need to use a touchscreen. You've got a button for your drive mode, you've got buttons for your HVAC. That's all you actually need. You've got Apple CarPlay, as you'd expect. The digital dash is absolutely gorgeous. Only thing I will say, Lotus didn't need to literally reinvent the wheel with this oval, oblong thing. I don't know what's wrong with the round wheel. You do get used to it, but I do wish I had a round wheel. Other than that, I can't believe how good the interior is. I mean, not just for Lotus, but just generally, it feels so special to be in. It's absolutely unbelievable. Before you even drive this car, you're sold on it. You really, really are. All it needs to do is drive adequately, and it's already a shoe-in. So luckily Lotus Emira is not just about the good looks, it does actually drive really, really nicely. I mean, as you'd expect for a Lotus product with 400 horsepower, manual gearbox, supercharged V6 engine. But before we get into it, let's just talk about what this car actually is, because I feel like a lot of people don't fully understand how special this is and what it actually is as a car. So first off, behind me, there's a V6 from Toyota. It's a 3.5 litre quad cam V6 from the Toyota Camry, but it's got a supercharger and it makes noises like this. Oh, it's so good! It's so lusty, it's so torquey, it sounds incredible. Yeah, unbelievable. Right, so 400 horsepower, 1400 kilo, mid-engined, manual 6-speed gearbox with really nice gear ratios. We'll get into that in a bit. This is a car that in 2024 delivers the same sort of drama and performance and road-focused friendliness that supercars used to have in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I mean that as high praise, because in my opinion, that was a sweet spot, the golden era for road-going sports cars. It's not too big, it's not too heavy, it's fast, but it's not too fast. And the emphasis is on the character instead of the outright performance. It's on the character and the feel and the noise and the experience of driving a sports car, because we live in an age where you can buy an 800 horsepower electric car and go from 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. But people aren't raving about those. Ultimately, performance is exciting, but it's not really what we're here for. Really what we want from a sports car is emotion and feel and that sense of connection with the road, and that's what the Emira delivers in spades. It's just such an experience. I mean, come on. Right, anyway, so I'm getting distracted. So, mechanically, this car is incredible. It's an aluminium chassis, 400 horsepower, 6-speed manual gearbox, fairly short ratios, especially compared to its rival, the Cayman 4-litre GTS. As a result, you can buzz through second, third, fourth, and not be doing license losing speeds, which makes it such an exciting car. You actually get the satisfying feeling of winding it out, accelerating, using the gearbox, really driving the car, really engaging with the car without constantly breaking the law. I love that. It's such a rare thing for a modern car to be exciting at sensible, safe, legal speeds. Even just doing 60 miles an hour down national speed limit lane, you can revel in that talkative steering. I drove my 1990's Carrera here, which I think is an absolute high watermark for feel, steering feel, chassis feel, delicacy, and this makes that car feel like it's got electronic steering. This is just, it's unbelievable in this day and age that you can have a hydraulically steered sports car that steers this nicely. On top of that, going back to chassis, mid-engined, and we've got passive dampers, which is a really rare thing in this day and age. They are beautifully damped. This car rides so well for a sports car. It's unbelievable. That makes it super usable in the UK, and it makes it a quicker car. It probably means that this is a bit too soft on track to really get the performance out of, but on the road it's absolutely gorgeous. And we've got double wishbone suspension all the way around. Not even Porsche did that. Porsche save that for their GT cars. Lotus give it on the Emira all the way around. And what double wishbone suspension means is that as the wheels go up and down in the suspension travel, the camber, the dynamic camber remains the same. So it gives it very consistent handling characteristics. All of that adds up to a beautiful feeling sports car. The only annoying thing is that they gave it this steering wheel which just isn't round. What's wrong with a round steering wheel? When have you ever got into a car and thought this is great, but I wish it didn't have a round steering wheel? I mean, it doesn't get in the way when you're actually going down the country lane, but around town, when you're winding on lock, you kind of want to catch the bottom of the steering wheel and you just can't. You have to kind of think about it and feel like a steering wheel isn't something you should think about. But it's not too thick. It's got thumb grips, which personally I'm not a fan of, but it feels amazing in your hand. And we're just in traffic here, which is a great opportunity to talk about an unexpected highlight. Now this is a Lotus, and previously you get into the Lotus and it smells like glue, and you've got no floor mats, and everything rattles, and you've got no armrest, and ergonomically it's just a mess. But they've always had good driving positions, but you know, this is just gorgeous inside. When you're sitting in traffic, you take a moment to look at the digital dash integration, the HVAC integration, the fact that everything is on arm's length. You've got Apple CarPlay here, and it's a perfect distance away from my hand to actually use the map. The gear change falls perfectly to hand. It's motoring cliche, but it really does, and it feels beautiful in your hand as well. This example with the kind of cocoa interior is so nice. They've done the two-tone really nicely. The leather feels amazing in your hand. The stereo is really good. It's a genuinely nice place to be. I just didn't expect to ever say that about a Lotus, to say that the interior is a genuine highlight. And I think the interior is actually way nicer than the Cayman as well. It feels far more special. Driving position is bang on, super easy to heel and tow. All the pedal weightings are really, really nice. The seat is super comfy, and unusually for a modern car, it's actually really softly padded, which I really like personally. That's something that I've always enjoyed about older cars. Just, wow, very un-Lotus. On top of that, when you look in your wing mirrors, you see those haunches, those McLaren-like haunches, which are just so dramatic. On top of that, this is a car that, in my opinion, has supercar proportions, supercar looks. And yeah, it's so easy to drive around town. The visibility is great, the mirrors are big enough. I can actually see out the back window, which is great. Not a huge amount, but I can see out of it. It's got a rear view camera, which has enough fisheye to fill in the blind spots. The only difficult thing is when you're coming out at a kind of acute angle, you can't quite see what's going up behind you, but that's to be expected with any car like this. But considering how dramatic it is, it's such an easy car to drive. All the controls are really nicely weighted. Anyone could jump into this and whiz it around town. And if you catch a reflection in a shop window, it's not even worth talking about. It's just unbelievable. But anyway, let's get on with the business of driving. Second gear, national speed limit, let's go. Right, so drivetrain. We've got an Eventuri intake on this car, and also it's got MSS springs, so it's a bit nicer. We'll talk about that later. But the Eventuri intake adds so much drama. It allows that supercharger intake whine to just breathe into the cabin in such a lovely, organic way. It adds so much drama to this car, and it means it's so enjoyable all the time without ever being obnoxious. It's such a special experience. It's on par with the best of them. It's on par with E46 CSL and the rest of it. As far as intake noise go, I love it. And it's such an interesting noise. It's not two-dimensional. It changes depending on load, depending on what you do with the throttle, depending when you lift off. You hear that supercharger just kind of gargling. It's so intoxicating. Anyway, the engine generally doesn't reveal its humble origins. It feels very exotic, especially in this day and age where everything is 2 litre turbocharged. This is such an exciting engine. It's so free revving. It's got a really light flywheel. It feels like a lightweight single mass flywheel, which I think is quite impressive. It's very, very drivable still, but the way it revs up through the gears is brilliant. It's super torquey, it's super usable. The one thing is, just when you feel like it's really waking up, just when you feel like it's really starting to sing, you have to change up. You run out of revs at about 6,800 RPM. I'm told this is due to emissions. Maybe well to map it out, I'm not sure. Because I know that in other applications this engine has revved past 7,000 RPM. But it really does feel like you end up hitting the limiter quite a lot, because if you drive this instinctively, it doesn't really tell you when to change up. It continues accelerating, continues sounding like it's got more to go, and then it runs out of revs. So you kind of learn to ping around in the mid-range, which is no bad thing because the torque is there and it's still a really exciting car. And that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the car. So the gear change, the gear ratios are lovely as we discussed, but the gear change, I mean, it feels good, it looks good, but it really can't be rushed. And it's a bit of a low light, to be honest. When you ping around town, it's all right. It takes some getting used to. You can feel the fact that it's got longer cables going to the engine. But when you put it under load, it feels like the mounts for the engine or the gearbox are too soft, and everything seems to move around. So when you try and grab second from third, which is a really key gear change for road driving, sometimes you can't quite catch second, or you think you're in second, but actually you're not. Now, if you're in a Porsche Cayman, you don't have that issue. And it's kind of a key part of a manual gearbox sports car in 2024, because dual clutch gearboxes are so good that driving a manual is all about the experience. So it's a bit of a disappointment that it's like that. At the same time, it does force you to think about the act of changing gear, and it kind of slows you down in a nice way. So it can't be rushed. You know, when you're driving an Ang, it's something you do have to think about. It doesn't fade into the background. Not necessarily a bad thing. I love the fact it doesn't rev much for you. You know, it forces you to really engage with the car. It forces you to be your best self, which is what a sports car should do. But ultimately, it is a bit of disappointment. And on top of that, the way the gates are spaced is a bit odd. it feels like the top gates, i.e. first, third and fifth, are slightly offset to the right of the bottom gates. So when you're going from fourth to fifth, that's a particularly difficult gear change. You have to be very deliberate with moving across the gate. Whereas most sports cars encourage you to almost move diagonally through the gate very intuitively. This, you really have to think about it. The downshifts, however, are fairly easy until you get to that third, second change where you have to kind of be quite deliberate, and the flywheel's almost too light for that gear change. You end up losing revs even with a rev match. I don't want to fall into the trap that most wing journalists fall into, which is expecting a car to feel good straight away. Most good cars, actually, you have to learn them after 2 or 3 weeks, but you only get a couple of hours as motor journalists, or maybe even a couple of days. In reality, yeah, you can jump into a Porsche and you can get to know it within an hour. Within an hour, you're pinging around and you've got the best out of it. Is that a good thing? I'm not so sure, because that's not what we do when we actually buy cars. I love a car that's complex enough that you have to actually learn it, get used to it, and it takes a couple of months to really settle in. It gives you that new car feeling for much longer, and you get that sense of novelty, which I think is no bad thing at all. So gear change is a low light. It doesn't ruin the car, but it's a quirk. Right, we touched on the drivetrain. Next thing is chassis, which, being a Lotus, is going to be the real main thing with this. But before that, we're just going to do one more pull. You'd just be nuts to not get the Eventuri intake if you've got one of these. It's just so good. It adds so much joy to the car for no downside. It's never intrusive. It's not like an exhaust. When you get a really nice exhaust, sometimes it can be a bit boomy at revs and it reduces the usability of the car. This, first off, is all for you. It's mainly you who can hear that intake. It's not other people. You're not bothering people around you. You're not going to set off noise cameras. But every time you just ping around, every time you pull around that mid-range, you hear it. Anyway, sorry, chassis. Right. So, this car is passively damped. There's no adaptive dampers, there's no modes. You can put it into sport mode or track mode, but that just messes with the DSC and the exhaust valves and the throttle mapping. But dampers always remain the same, and on top of it, this is the Tour package, which is actually a bit softer than the Sport, and it rides so nicely. Call me a Luddite, but I'm sick of modern cars that have 4 different suspension modes and none of them actually feel that good. This, it has one and it just works. You get into it and it works. You don't even think about it. You've got engineers who've been doing this for many years who have set this car up perfectly for their home roads around Norfolk, and it just feels absolutely beautiful. It's such a highlight. You've got that amazing steering fork combining with that to give you all of the information you need to punt this down a B road effectively and quickly. However, what I am a little bit surprised, actually I'm not surprised because this is actually a fairly typical Lotus trait for their road cars, is that the steering is a tiny bit vague off center and it's just a little bit understeery. I feel like Lotus have baked this in to stop some of the snappiness you do get from a mid-engine car, which I haven't experienced this at all, because you've got that safe envelope understeer. Now it's very communicative, it doesn't jump out at you, but it just hasn't quite got that scalpel-like sharpness of a Porsche product. Do you find that understeer on the road, down a B road? To be honest, no. You'd have to be driving quite poorly to find that understeer. But it is there. You notice it on, say, a big 3-lane roundabout where you just want to see what the car can do. By the time you start pulling a little bit of G's in the seat, it kind of just runs out of front end grip. And that does take away from your confidence just a little bit. However, when you have a car that's slightly understeery, you use the brakes a lot more. The brakes in this are absolutely fantastic. The feel, progression, the fade resistance, all brilliant. And if you dab the brakes on turn in while lifting off, the nose tucks right in. So you've got that engagement where you can play around with it. And what driving around in the 911 has taught me is that understeer can be engaging in its own way, because you learn how to manage it by using the throttle and by using the brakes, and that gets your brain going, that gets you engaging with the car, engaging with the road, which again is what a sports car is all about. So again, I would like the front end to be tied down a little bit more. I feel like it just needs a touch of front rake and a little bit of front camber. When you look at the car, you can tell it hasn't really got a lot of front camber. And if you were to start it in, I think it would be bonkers, to be honest. I think it would be absolutely unreal. But as standard, it's still lovely. For the job of just getting down a B road effectively and enjoyably, it's really, really good. And that brings us on to the broader point about this car. To be frank, it's not a 10/10 car. It's not a car where you look at an empty B road and you think, I'm going to get down this road as quickly and as aggressively as possible. You need to learn this car's quirks. You need to drive around it a little bit. You need to manage it. you need to manage that gear change, you need to manage the steering and the turning. But is that a bad thing? I feel like we've been spoiled for the last kind of 5-10 years with cars that do everything so well that all you need to do is get in and turn the wheel and drive however quick you want. And we've developed this idea that sports cars are cars to be used as tools, but I don't believe that. I think an M car is a car to be used as a tool, but a sports car should be about challenging you as a driver and making you think, making you engage with B roads. We live in an age where roads are getting slower. How often do you get a chance to really open up the sports car? What a good sports car should do, what my 996 does, that it speaks to you on an everyday basis. This car is so fun at 60 mile an hour, which, considering the performance at hand, is unbelievable. And on top of that, it has the road presence and the specialness and the performance of our dream cars, the Ferrari 355s, Ferrari 360s, these early 2000s engaging manual supercars that were just so desirable, that had a magic that was lost in later cars. It's unbelievable. And on top of that, even when you're driving, you get to admire the looks. You get to see it in shop windows, you get to see those flanks in the rearview mirror, you get to see the haunches in the front. You have an idea of how this car looks even just sitting here. You get this line that goes up from here that follows the bodyline of the car. It's such a special place to be. And the question on the tips of everyone's tongues is, should you buy this over a 708 Cayman GTS? And the fact is, the GTS is a better tool for the act of driving quickly, but this feels so much more special, so much more desirable. It's so much more exciting, it sounds better. It's not even worth talking about how much better it looks. It's just, you know, it's a supercar compared to a sports car. The interior is gorgeous. When I see this, it has this magnetic appeal that makes me want to be around it. And you don't get that with a Cayman. And this Eventuri, this should come with it as standard. It really should. It really should. So, Cayman or this, I think most people will never exploit the envelope performance that makes the Cayman better than this. And day to day, pinging around, using a sports car in the way that most people use it, this is just the more exciting, the more special car. But if you want to rip around Anglesey or the Ring or Silverstone, fine, get the Cayman. But for us mere mortals who spend most of the time driving on B roads and around town and using the car day to day, this is just brilliant. It's just unbelievable. I mean, listen to that. Listen to that flywheel. Listen to where it revs up. Oh man. It's got this skunk works appeal to it that you can't get it from a German manufacturer. You just can't. They're too polished. They're too polished to give you that. The one annoying thing about this car is that I can't afford it. Really, because I want it. I want this. I want this really more than anything else for under probably 150k. It's completely blown me away. It's completely beguiling. It's just absolutely unbelievable that you can walk into a dealership and you can buy this car in this day and age. This one's a 2023, and you get into it and you just drive. You don't need to press any buttons. You don't need to turn off lane assist, or the speed limiter warning, or put it onto a specific mode because it doesn't drive right. Let's put it into that mode. You just get into it, you press the button, and you drive off. How nuts is that? Anyway, I could go on and on about this, but you need to just see one of these for yourself. You need to test drive one, and you need to buy one. If you're in a position to, you need to just do it. And enjoy it while it's new. Enjoy being able to own one of these cars with a warranty, and enjoying all the perks of a new car without losing any of the perks of an older car. What a compelling proposition. And if you're depressed about the automotive landscape in 2024, just remember, you can buy this, you can buy a GR86, you can buy an MX-5 ND2, you can buy all sorts of Porsches, you can buy a manual BMW M2. It's still alive. Petrolheadism is still alive and out there. The fact that this car exists gives me life. I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks Eventuri for lending me this car. And yeah, buy that intake if you've got one of these, because that kind of drama is priceless. It really, really is. My name's Garleb, you're watching Shooting Brake. Make sure to like and subscribe to this video if you want more feature content from us. And enjoy your evening. I'll see you next time. Oh man. What a car. What a car, this is nuts.